You want to learn something new, but here's what actually happens. You watch one more tutorial, you save one more video, you buy one more course, you tell yourself you'll start once you understand it properly, and weeks later, you know more than when you started, but you can't actually do anything. Here's the uncomfortable truth. You're not learning slowly because you lack talent. You're learning slowly because you're preparing to learn instead of learning. You're collecting information, but you're not converting it into ability. Batman never waited to feel ready. When he needed a new skill, he didn't study it for months before touching it. He identified what mattered, trained it immediately, failed in front of the problem, adjusted, and went again. That gap between knowing and doing, that's the only thing separating you from everyone who learns fast. Today you're getting the exact system to close it, so you can start almost anything and become dangerously good at it, faster than people who've been studying it for a year. The biggest learning mistake: most beginners share one addiction, tutorial addiction. It feels productive. Your brain rewards you with dopamine every time you learn a new fact. Even if you never use it, this creates an illusion of progress. You feel like you're moving forward, while your actual skill stays exactly where it started. Underneath this is something deeper: fear of being bad at something in public. Perfectionism disguised as preparation. If you're still researching, you can't fail yet, so you keep researching forever. Here's the rule that breaks this pattern: learn only enough to take the first real action, then act immediately. If you want to learn coding, you don't need 40 hours of theory. You need to understand variables, then write 10 lines of broken code. If you want to get in shape, you don't need the perfect program. You need to walk into the gym and do one imperfect workout. If you want to write, you don't need to study grammar for a month. You need to write one bad paragraph today. The gap closes the moment you stop preparing and start doing. Start before you feel ready. Your brain craves certainty before action. It's wired that way for safety. Uncertainty feels like danger, so it convinces you to gather more information first. But skill doesn't come from certainty. It comes from contact. Starting badly feels uncomfortable because your identity hasn't caught up to your ambition yet. You still see yourself as someone who doesn't know how. The only way to update that identity is to act like the person you're becoming. Before you feel like them, here's a concrete method. Learn the basic concept in under an hour. Attempt the real task immediately. Notice exactly what you don't know. Learn only that specific gap. Try again. This isn't reckless. It's targeted. You're not avoiding preparation. You're refusing to let preparation replace practice. Find the 20% that actually matters. Not everything you could learn deserves your attention right now. A small number of fundamentals usually produce most of your results. This isn't a perfect mathematical law, but the pattern shows up everywhere. Ask this question for any skill: what are the few things that make everything else easier? For public speaking, it's not vocabulary, it's pacing, eye contact, and structure. For fitness, it's not exotic exercises, it's consistency, compound lifts, and recovery. For writing, it's not fancy vocabulary, it's clarity, rhythm, and finishing what you start. For coding, it's not memorizing every function, it's understanding logic, loops, and how to debug. For business, it's not branding, it's finding someone with a problem and solving it. For language learning, it's not grammar rules, it's the 200 words people actually use every day. To find your own 20%, ask, what do the best people in this skill always do? What mistakes do beginners repeatedly make that experts don't? Learn that first. Everything else can wait. Learn by doing. This is where speed is actually created. Passive consumption feels like learning, but it often builds only recognition, not ability. You can watch 100 videos on public speaking and still freeze on stage because your brain has never rehearsed the actual skill, only the idea of it. Real learning follows a cycle. Input, attempt, feedback, correction, repeat. Batman trained this way instinctively. He didn't read about combat. He entered it, absorbed damage, adjusted his stance, and returned smarter. Here's how to structure this in 60 minutes. 10 minutes learning the core concept. 40 minutes attempting the real task, not a simplified version. 10 minutes reviewing what went wrong and why. If you're learning to write, that means 10 minutes on structure, 40 minutes actually writing. 10 minutes editing and noticing patterns in your mistakes. One real session like this outperforms 5 hours of passive watching. Turn mistakes into information. Beginners interpret mistakes emotionally. I failed. I'm not good at this. Fast learners interpret mistakes differently. Now I know what doesn't work. That single shift in language changes everything. Use this framework after every mistake. What did I attempt? What went wrong? Why did it go wrong? What will I change next time? Then try again immediately. If your code crashes, don't just fix it and move on. Ask why it crashed. That answer becomes permanent knowledge. Batman's greatest advantage was never physical. It was that he treated every failed attempt as data instead of defeat. He never fought the same mistake twice. Build a rapid feedback loop. Feedback is the accelerator underneath all of this. Without it, you can practice the wrong thing for years and never notice. Practice, test, measure, correct, repeat. You don't need a mentor watching your every move. You can create feedback yourself, record yourself speaking, and watch it back. Compare your writing against work you genuinely admire. Time yourself and track whether you're improving. Build small projects and see if they actually work. Review your own output the next day with fresh eyes. The goal isn't perfection on the first attempt. The goal is a tight loop between doing and correcting. The tighter that loop, the faster the skill compounds. Teach yourself. Independent learners don't wait for someone to hand them knowledge. They build a process for extracting it themselves. Find information from sources that have actually produced results, not just people who talk about the topic. Ask sharper questions. Instead of how do I get better at this? Ask, what's the one thing holding me back right now? Break difficult concepts into smaller pieces you can test individually. Take notes in your own words, not copied sentences. Then close the material and try to recall it without looking. If you can't, you didn't actually learn it. You only recognized it. Use the explain it like I'm teaching someone method. Try explaining the concept simply enough for a beginner to understand. If you struggle, that's exactly where your real gap is hiding. Batman never had a teacher standing over his shoulder in the field. He built the ability to extract lessons from every situation himself. That is the actual superpower, not knowledge, the ability to generate knowledge on demand. Become the person who can learn anything. Here's the real transformation hiding underneath this entire system. This was never just about coding, or fitness, or writing, or speaking. Those are just proof. The real skill you're building is knowing how to learn. Once that identity forms, new skills stop looking impossible. They start looking like a process you already know how to run. Start. Identify what matters. Practice immediately. Fail on purpose. Correct with precision. Repeat without ego. Teach it back to yourself. That sequence works for anything. A language, a business, an instrument, a sport, a craft. You stop asking, can I do this? And start asking, what's the next thing I need to learn? That question alone will separate you from 90% of people for the rest of your life. The compound effect of small repetitions. Speed doesn't come from one heroic effort. It comes from small repetitions stacked on top of each other, day after day, without drama. But 20 sessions will. And most people quit exactly between session 3 and session 7, because that's where the initial excitement fades and the real work begins. This is the exact point where Batman's discipline separates itself from ordinary willpower. He didn't rely on motivation. Motivation is a feeling, and feelings are unreliable. He relied on a system that didn't require him to feel ready every single day. So here's a practical tool to survive that middle phase. Track your reps, not your results. Don't measure yourself only by how good you are today. Measure yourself by whether you showed up and executed the cycle. Start, attempt, fail, correct, repeat. If you did that today, you won. The trap of comparing your chapter 1 to someone else's chapter 20. You start learning something new, and within days, you're comparing your first attempts to people who've been doing this for years. This comparison feels like honest self-assessment, but it's actually a distortion. You're comparing a beginning to an ending.
Batman's first night on the streets wasn't his best night. It was clumsy, dangerous, and far from controlled. But he didn't measure that first night against his 100th. He measured it against the night before, where he hadn't started at all. Are you better than you were last week? Not are you better than someone who started long before you. One final warning before you start.
This system will not feel comfortable. It's not supposed to. Comfort and growth rarely exist in the same moment. That discomfort is not a sign you're doing this wrong. It's a sign you're finally doing it at all. Most people spend their entire lives circling a skill, admiring it from a safe distance, never touching it directly. They call it someday. Someday quietly becomes never for almost everyone who says it. But not for you, not after today. Start before you feel ready. Find the 20% that matters most. Learn by doing, not by watching. Treat every mistake as information, not identity. Build a feedback loop, even if you have to build it alone. Teach yourself, relentlessly, without waiting for permission, and repeat that cycle until it becomes who you are, not just something you occasionally do. That is how ordinary people become dangerously capable, not through talent, through a refusal to stay unprepared. The greatest advantage isn't knowing everything. It's knowing with total certainty that you can learn anything you decide to. If you're ready to become someone who can learn anything, type it below. I can learn anything. Not because you already know how, but because you've just been given the system to find out